it's the road to Nomadland, and for me and Jess, it began 18 years ago when you were in my class. 18 years is hard to believe.
God, our friendship is old enough to vote.
and Jess was very industrious. Was it your fourth or your fifth story, Jess, that ran on the Washington Post that you did for my class?
I don't know. I did a lot of random stuff about fixing driveways for the Queen's Chronicle, so I think it probably came after that illuminating series.
Maybe I'm overstating it, but it was pretty fast that you had a story published in the Washington Post, and you killed it. You just killed it in class, and you went on and you had an interesting career. It's not a linear career in terms of you didn't start doing books right away. Obviously, you worked for a variety of publications, including the New York Observer. You were at Fortune Small Business, the Portland Oregonian, and then you came back to New York, and we started teaching together. But you accrued quite a number of clips, and you did your first book called Burning Book on Burning Man. And the great thing, I'll speak for you, it's a reported Burning Man book. It isn't about Jess's, whatever experience in the desert. She worked all the angles repertorially, very deeply reported. The LA Times pointed that out very wisely in their review, that it was, thank God, a reported book on Burning Man. And I was at Urban Outfitters, even carried it for a few years.
Killing me, Dale, killing me.
Yeah, anyway, so then you come up to, you're teaching with me, and this is, correct me if I'm wrong, Jess, I used a reading in our packet by Mac McClelland from Mother Jones on, she worked undercover in an Amazon warehouse. And there was a paragraph in this story, and it intrigued, really intrigued.
Okay, maybe I should tell the story.
Tell the story.
Okay, yeah, so this is something I also deal with when I teach journalism quite a bit, is students always want to know, where do stories come from? It's like the where do babies come from of our trade. And the truth is often really mundane, but I think that's kind of reassuring. At least it is to me, because it means things are within all of our reach, right? It's not like ideas jump fully formed out of your head, like Athena springing from Zeus's noggin or anything like that. And in my case, I read a lot, like all of us should be doing. And I did read an article by Gabriel Mack, then Mac McClelland,
yes,
in Mother Jones, and it was fantastic. And at the time, somebody approached the reporter and said, I live in an RV, I can't afford to retire, there's a whole program for people like us. And then the story just went on, but I kind of got hung up there. I mean, I really couldn't stop. It was like I snagged on it. And it just didn't align with what I thought I knew about RVs, retirement, all sorts of things. And when I started looking into it, it turned out that not only did Amazon have this program they called Camper Force, but there were hundreds, probably even thousands of employers all over the country catering to the same demographic, this kind of pseudo retiree, this person who was at what used to be traditional retirement age, who couldn't afford to retire. And a lot of these jobs were pretty hard physical labor, and they were all short and seasonal, and they were all over the country. So in my mind, the second those things sparked, I just wanted to know more. Who are these people? What are they doing? Did they ever envision doing anything like this? I just had a lot of questions, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. I call that the haunted nugget, which sounds ridiculous. It's like you're haunted by a story, and that's how you know it's a good one. Is you can't stop. You're not able to sleep because you're thinking about it and you're wondering about it.
And how did you started reporting? You had to go out and actually meet people. There was a very interesting thing that you did. You piggybacked a reporting trip onto another project.
Yeah, I had a speaking gig that I wasn't that excited about, actually, in San Francisco. And I wanted to visit my friends in San Francisco. So I asked them if, instead of putting me up in a hotel, if the sponsors would give me a stipend. And then as soon as I finished speaking, I turned around and rented a car and drove to Fernley, Nevada. And I drove there because that was the place where one of Amazon's Camper Force locations was. If anybody here has seen Nomadland, the movie, the place I went to is called the Desert Rose. It's the RV park where Frances McDormand's character does not take the dog. That's not really a spoiler, I promise. So I went there and I started talking to people. I'd also primed the pump by reaching out to just about everybody I could on Camper Force, looking at who, there were closed groups on Facebook, but you could see the membership rosters. And I must have reached out to 40 different people. And one of them, Net Camp, wrote back, and he was my ambassador.
So then you pitched the story to Harper's. I lost track of that process. How long did it be from that reporting trip to getting the go ahead from Harper's?
That's a good question. I'm a pretty neurotic pre-reporter when I do pitches, particularly if I've never worked with an editor or a magazine. I feel like I have to prove to them that I can deliver, right? And that I can deliver on the particular idea that I'm pitching. So in this case, I'd interviewed a whole bunch of people, was telling a particular story. I had actually pitched to the New Yorker and they turned it down, and went to Harper's, which had turned down a story I wrote before. And this one stuck. Actually, when they turned it down, I'd met this editor who seemed really, really cool. And we got coffee and he said, I liked the story. My boss, didn't feel the same, but pitch me again. So I pitched him again and he loved it. He absolutely loved it. This is James Marcus, one of the best editors I've ever worked with, who was then at Harper's.
Yeah. So you get the assignment, and again, correct my memory, it's been a while. You go out to Arizona to Quartzsite, where people gather in the winter. You had a tent, and I do vividly remember you called me from that tent. It was winter, and you can't believe this, guys. I could hear her teeth chattering or in the phone call. It was friggin' cold, and you're in this tent. Is that an accurate memory? Pretty much.
Yeah. Well, as it turns out, Burning Man is not great training for wintertime high desert camping. Shocker, right? So yeah, I was out there in pretty much a scouting tent, like one of those classic green tents, with a rental car, editing student papers I had a portable scanner, and I would go to a McDonald's and edit my papers because we had just gotten out and it was the end of the term. But yeah, I went out there looking for characters. Harper's had offered to put me in a hotel for 2 nights, and I figured I'm not going to learn anything in 2 nights. So I was out there camping for probably about 2 weeks.
And you had a dilemma. You had a character you'd met in Fernley who you lost. And so suddenly you really didn't have a main through line character anymore.
Yeah, I was definitely running scared. The guy, and I can use his name now, it's okay because he's not with Amazon anymore, but I interviewed probably at least 60 people who had worked in Amazon's Camper Force program. And gosh darn it, if he wasn't the only guy who actually got hired on full time. And he told me, look, I'm finally able to put together an emergency fund, and I'm saving up for a Harley or something like that. And he said, I'm afraid that if you talk about me, they will give me what they call the ACS, the Amazon cold shoulder, which is what happens if you walk up to the warehouse and try to use your card to get in, and suddenly your card isn't recognized. So I'm a journalist, and of course I'd been on the record with him, or he'd been on the record with me, but I'm also a human being, and I'm not going to cost this guy his livelihood. So I'm out there working with a new editor on this topic. He had pointed me, Jerry had pointed me to this place. He said, it's like spring break for seniors and everybody goes there. So, okay. Yeah, and it's funny. It really taught me a lot about how you prepare as much as you can. And then if serendipity is going to happen, it will. I'm not woo-woo at all, but I find out that, if you want to catch some rain, it helps to have a very large bucket. So when I was out there, I spent a lot of time with people I'd met in Fernley. And one of them, a woman named Iris, who had it was a parrot named Casper. She was living in a 12-foot trailer with a parrot named Casper, a lovebird, a Shih Tzu. She had a whole menagerie in there. And one day she said, Jess, I'm going to this thing called the Rubber Tramp Rendezvous. Do you want to come with me? And I said, sure. And that turned out to be one of the best answers I think I've ever given to a question, because it opened up a whole new world of sourcing for me.
You met a very special person at the Rubber Tramp Rendezvous. Tell her how you met Linda May.
Yeah. Okay, Linda May is awesome. So I was out at this event called the Rubber Tramp Rendezvous, trying to meet people, dealing with a little skepticism. This one woman said to me, oh, you're the journalist. You're going to make us all look like a bunch of homeless vagabonds. And then I tend to not push on people if I get that reaction. I just, when they realize I'm going to stick around, sometimes they'll talk to me later, as she did. But I hadn't, I met a lot of people who worked for Camper Force and I just wasn't feeling it. And I was running out of time. And I remember I was talking to you on the phone. I was mentally auditioning people for my lead character. And I was like, no, no, and towards the end, one of the last people I met was this woman named Linda May. And she'd been out on the road for, gosh, just under a year. She had done Amazon. She had worked as a campground host. She'd been living in a trailer, kind of a fishing cabinish trailer in Lake Elsinore in California, and realized that when she started getting Social Security, it was going to be $500 a month. She had worked tons of jobs, never gotten anything like a pension, had taken time out of the workforce to care when her mom had terminal cancer, and just wasn't going to be able to make it in any kind of retirement. And she ended up out on the road. So when she talked to me, first of all, she's a quote machine. She's just amazing. I mean, Dale, at this point, you've met her.
Oh,
What do you think of Linda May?
she is a journalist's dream. She is funny. She is really, really smart. Um, no, you just the kind of woman you just want to have, I hate to be a cliche, you want to have a beer with or a glass of wine with. I mean, she's great. I got the fortune of meeting her a few years ago. But she told you some pretty intense stuff. And there's a story, I don't know if you want to share it, about that night around Lake Elsinore when she was living over there. When did she tell you that story?
When did you tell me that story?
Was that early or was that later
That was
in the
pretty
process?
early. We were having coffee. I mean, Linda likes to joke that she may write a memoir one day called Can I Pet Your Dog? Because that was my in to approach her. I'm kind of a weird, gregarious, shy person, even as a journalist. And I like dogs. So that was kind of a good way to step up and say hello. I think the second thing I said was, May I interview you? But yeah, we got along and we were sitting in, she had an RV back then. And she was telling me that when she realized, how low this actually, sorry, this was before. I think it was Thanksgiving of 2012 when things were really bad. She hadn't been able to find work. There was no power, there was no water. And she had a moment where she figured her friend had been storing some booze at her place that she was going to basically drink it all. She was a alcoholic in recovery for what it's worth. And then she was going to turn on the propane and light a cigarette. And as she said, blow us all to hell. But she had her two little dogs in there and she looked at them and said, I can't do that. And ended up, living another day and changing her plans. And that was a really harrowing thing to say. And being Linda, she said it with this gallows humor. I mean, when she said, blow us all to hell, it wasn't in a heavy way. So she had there was just a lot going on with her.
Yeah. So she opened up to you really fast. But when did you realize that she was going to be like this major subject of the book of Nomadland? Was it right away? Was it instant, or did it develop over time?
Well, it developed over time because the magazine story came first. So I realized that I wanted to highlight her in the magazine when I asked her what she planned to do when she got old and couldn't drive the RV anymore and work these jobs. Most of the people I'd spoken to really didn't have a good answer. A lot of them said, hopefully they'd get land and settle down, people were saying, or, Thelma and Louise it off a cliff. I heard stuff like my long-term healthcare plan is bleached bones in the desert. And some people just really refused to think that far ahead. Linda took a vinyl 3-ring binder, it was like this fake wood grain binder, out of the RV loft and started showing me pictures of something called an Earthship, which is this 1970s, basically feat of recycled architecture that is designed to be sustainable, made out of used materials. It keeps you warm. You don't need to really power it. It has solar. It does everything. And Linda had been a general contractor, and her dream was to buy land and build one of these things. And I thought that was really interesting. And it also, I figured, I hoped, might give her some kind of an arc, because whether she got there or not, having a dream put her on a path, if that makes any sense.
Yes, and so you guys bonded, and you're out there, and then let's slow down. You the magazine article comes out, and you get a book contract, and so now you're really going to immerse. And you had trouble, I remember, with the tent. You really couldn't be with everybody out in the rubber chaparral, but you needed a vehicle to do that. Uh, and so you went hunting for a van. Tell a little bit about how you found your. I'm not gonna say anymore. You tell that story.
Okay, well, yeah, embarrassingly, it started with sanitation, in that their rangers told everybody out on public land in the boondocks, as they say, out in the desert, that if you had a tent, you had to be within, I think, 500 yards of a outhouse. Except all the people I wanted to write about weren't 5,000 yards near an outhouse. They were all self-contained. They all had their own toileting situations and whatever they needed. And I wanted to live alongside them. I wanted to be there when we all woke up in the morning and when we went to bed at night. I wanted to become part of the furniture. And that meant finding a van. And I went on Craigslist and I looked all over. West Coast was a good choice because all old vehicles out here seem to have been eaten up by salt, the salt we put on the roads in the winter. And I found something out there. It's 1995 GMC that had been converted. And a friend went and looked at it and ended up picking it up for me. And I named it Halen because I'm that kind of dad pun girl.
Van Halen.
Yeah, sorry.
So now you have Van Halen, and there was I remember I was in California, and I helped you put the solar panels on Van Halen. I can't remember what year it was now. It was so long ago, and you spirited off in Van Halen. I took Max the dog and was dog dad, and you went out to the desert. So tell about those first days in Van Halen.
Oh, it was crazy because I was embarking on this big project and I knew I had to get back to the desert. I realized when I got there, I had no idea where I was going to camp. The person who took me in was a woman named Swanky, who it turned out knew somebody I knew from way back when and opened her camp to me and really helped me figure out how to do the van thing. It was really cold outside. Being in the van at night was like being in an ice box, and she would wake up and run the engine and go back to sleep again. And it felt like you were in a camp of kind of snoring elephants. Like somebody would wake up and do that, and the kind of rumble would stop. And then again, later we ended up getting propane heaters. It's a long story. But she was amazing. There was a young trans man in her camp named Vincent who had a little Astro van and was kitting it out because he thought this was the only way he'd be able to achieve some sort of financial freedom. And Swanky was helping him put his solar on. And beyond that, her family was a bit estranged, wouldn't let her get mail at their place anymore. But she had a P.O. box in Quartzsite and was letting Vincent ship his testosterone shots there. And, this is a woman in her 70s and a trans man in his 20s. And that kind of intergenerational friendship really, I just thought was really fantastic. So
once you had the van, you really, really immersed and got to know people. You did a lot of jobs. You worked at Amazon, and the one that I swear I could hear the fatigue in your voice was the sugar beet job, where you were an inspector for a sugar beet harvest.
Yeah, they were piling up the sugar beets in Drayton, North Dakota. All the field harvest is automated now, but there are these jobs, and they cater to RVers, and they basically put us in what they said was an RV park, but was really kind of a muddy field with not functioning bathrooms yet, and that was about it. And you'd go to work and be on your feet for 12 hours on concrete, helping as the haul trucks brought in the sugar beets, dumped them in this big mechanical hopper, inevitably spilled them all over the place. The ones in the hopper would go up a conveyor belt, and we'd have to shovel the ones that didn't make it back in with these big agricultural scoops. Now, some of the beets were nearing basketball size, and there was a woman up in the control tower hitting a horn that sounded like an alarm on a nuclear sub or something, and pointing to one side, and we'd have to shovel, and we were all wiped out. And there were people who were doing this who were twice my age. I was in my 30s at the time, and it made me hurt And I was in pretty good shape. I'd run a half marathon a year or two before. And I swear, every injury I'd ever had that I thought was gone floated up to the surface. I was so tired that I went back to my van and tried to watch something light, a Wallace and Gromit movie, and found it too stressful to sleep because there was like a runaway car or something. And I just thought the chickens were going to die or whatever. And I couldn't do it. So that was a job I was glad to leave. But generally, I'd rather follow people than go undercover, which is what I did for most of the book. For those two jobs, the work sites were closed, and I'd heard a lot about them, and I wanted to portray them accurately, which is why I applied for jobs.
You got very close to people, Linda, Swanky, a few others. You know, this is a journalistic process where you're so immersed and you're living among them. You, as I recall, you reminded them you were doing a story by always having the recorder out when you were talking, when you would sit in the back of the I forget what Linda's
The squeeze in.
Squeeze in. So it was like a flag, like I am interviewing you, I am doing this for a book. I found that when I was doing homeless reporting with hobos back 35, 40 years ago, people did, oh yeah, you're doing a book, everybody's doing a book. They don't really believe you because
I
it's
think
like,
that's worse now.
yeah,
You?
what's that?
In a weird way, with citizen journalism and everything, I think people are more skeptical now.
Oh yeah, oh I think it's harder.
If you
Oh
say
yeah,
you're doing a book, people are like, okay, whatever.
yeah.
So I didn't know you got whatever too.
Yeah. It was weird reactions, and we don't have, there was no Twitter and social media back in those days, no Instagram. So but you reminded them of the journalism that was happening, and then
I carried my Columbia bag around a lot. It's fallen apart, but I had a J school bag, and I would carry that around just to remind them. I called it Belling the cat. I also started with this tiny digital recorder, and by the end had this big thing with a windscreen on it that I put on a small tripod. And it was funny because I felt like the bigger the recorder got, the more confessional Linda became, when I expected it to be the inverse.
wow. So people really opened up, and I want to bring it home to the book getting published and the film, because we want to give time for Q&A. We're about a half hour in now, but just the book comes out. It was to my take a very wonderful publishing experience. I felt Norton was very good to you, and the book comes out, and so just tell about that process before we get to the movie. So what was that like?
It was crazy. When you work on something like that and you're doing it on and off for years and it's about to come out and you don't know if anybody will give a damn about it. There's no way to tell. And the worst thing you could expect is silence. And the funny thing with Nomadland was it was a slow burn. People actually assumed that it was a bestseller when it came out. It wasn't until recently. It ended up getting some fantastic reviews, but it was one of those things that's a critical success, but I guess not considered a commercial success. And frankly, I'm down with the former. I was pretty stoked, but it took a while. It wasn't something that just caught on fire, but its audience seemed to find it over time, and it just gathered momentum in a slow and strange way.
And I want to point out again, bringing it home to journalism, where titles do matter. And I remember the phone call when you found the title. It was such a yeah, because you had a number of provisional titles.
Yeah.
And titles matter. And the great thing about Nomadland is it's both verby and yet it's a noun. It's a strange word. And you were worried that the publisher would say, this is a weird word, we're not going to use this.
And at first they wanted it to be 2 words, and I wanted it to be 1 word. And, you can have a pretty bitter fight over that one little space. I think it was just a copy desk, actually. It wasn't something that my editor felt strongly about.
But ultimately, the title, I think,
when it worked, because marketing can shut you down. I mean, things like the cover are really important too, and they can shut you down on that.
Right.
I had a cover at one point that I hated. I thought it looked like trailers at an army base with like a big chain link fence and an American flag, and it felt very militaristic instead of kind of moody and questioning. And I wasn't sure if I'd be able to, convince them to go back to the moody one.
The moody one won, thankfully. That was a horrible, that army base one was terrible. Oh, but the title was brilliant. And for those of you who are listening, if you're going to do a book, the title is important. But I think the title might have attracted, and to tell about how the film thing happened. Do you think the title had any impact on the interest initially with the film people?
I'm not sure. Although when I first met the director, she said, "Where did you get that from? Nomadland." And I didn't have a story. It just came to me. I'd been racking my brain. I forgot about it and it popped into my head. It's the kind of thing that you get when you're in the shower, when you're not thinking about it. I did once put a dive slate in my shower so I could try to write down ideas there. And that is a great way to chase them away. So don't do that crazy thing. But yeah, I'm not sure. What happened was I was out in Halen, the 19-foot 4-ton van, dealing with LA traffic to do a book appearance when I got a call from my literary agent here in New York, who I met right before selling the book. And she told me that an agent at something called UTA wanted to talk to me, and I had no idea what that was. And then it turned out, United Talent Agency, and she scouted books for film and TV. And I said, "Oh, sure, okay." I met up with her. She was lovely, but I have a lot of friends whose books have been optioned, and then all they hear is crickets. I have friends who have had their hearts broken. I have friends who have, I've just seen so many people get burned or disappointed that I kept myself on a very steady diet of low expectations.
Yeah, no, and so somehow this person got the book under the nose of Frances McDormand, as I recall.
Yeah, it was actually Frances McDormand has an agent. Frances McDormand has a farm. Sorry, no, she has an agent. A little punchy here. Her agent is married to an actor who's also a producer named Peter Spears, who did the film Call Me by Your Name. And apparently, the woman who was representing me had put on an internal email that UTA was now representing Nomadland. And Peter was the one who saw it. He read it and apparently thought to himself, "Hey, this could be Frances's next role." He flagged his husband, who was also at UTA, and they brought it to Frances. And that's where it started. I mean, it was Peter and Frances who essentially optioned it together.
Great. And what I like, and so then the director Chloe Zhao comes in, who did The Rider, of course, which was a very verite film set on a reservation in South Dakota. She used a lot of Native American actors in that film, very critically acclaimed film. And she had this notion to do the same with Nomadland. And what I like about it is it does hew to the book in a really good way. It starts in Empire, Nevada, which was a Christian Science Monitor story you did about a dying town, a company town that went dead. And the book starts there too, wisely. And it was kind of a much of the 3-act structure. You have to show cause and effect. People are losing jobs, good jobs, and they're hitting the road. So then the characters, of course, come in. And of course, Linda May and Swanky are huge pieces of the film. To tell about that process a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, I'd seen The Rider, and I knew about Chloe's work with first-time actors. I like calling them that rather than non-actors because I think it's more forward-facing and just, people can do it. So when I saw The Rider and I loved it, I wondered if that would happen with Nomadland, but it wasn't clear at all. And I still remember when she was going to check out the Rubber Tramp Rendezvous and called me for the first time, and I gave her notes on things to look for, things that were different from the past, stuff like that, people to talk to. And then I remember one time when she asked me if I would introduce her to Linda May, who was the main person in the book. And she said, "Do you think Linda May would be good on camera?" And I wish I'd done some video back at the J School. It was a different time when I was there in 2003, a lot of less hybridization going on. And I didn't know if Linda would be good on camera or not, frankly, but I did know what made her great for me as a writer and a documentarian on the page. And that was how Linda was Linda. No matter if she was talking to me or talking to her daughter or talking to a grocery clerk, she wasn't turning it on for everyone. She was comfortable in her skin. And I thought that might translate, and I think it actually did.
Yeah, absolutely. So the film's, up for Oscars now. So it's been quite a journey. How many years total?
Well, that depends. If you want to go all the way back to Empire, that was 2011. And weirdly, if anybody's seen the movie, in the first scene, Francis gets a big hug from somebody outside a mini storage place. His name is Gay DeForest, and he was one of my sources in 2011 because he used to work at the gypsum plant. So that's how kind of incestuous with the reporting this whole thing became. Yeah, and it was amazing. And I think I lost track of where the question was going.
Well, to me, the film, just to sum up the film, it's verite. It feels real because there's real people in it, and they're telling their own stories. Linda tells the trailer blowing up story in the film.
Yeah, almost verbatim from how she told it in Harper's, which was wild because it was years later.
Yeah,
Um,
and
although one character, sorry, Swanky in the film, again, this won't spoil or anything, is terminally ill. And there have been news reports since the film came out that said that Swanky died during the filming, that the film was dedicated to her memory. I hope none of these reports came from J school grads because clearly they didn't fact check. And Swanky was laughing her butt off, and her family was actually kind of freaked out by all the reports of her death. So she's fine.
Like Mark Twain, the reports of my death were premature.
Very premature, we hope.
Well, let's open to the questions. We're now at 40 minutes in. I'm not sure how we work this. Do we click the buttons, or anybody has a question? You raise your hand, and I guess we click on you. I think that's how it works.
Or you could just call. You could just call on whoever has their hand up, and they can unmute themselves.
Oh, okay, cool. That makes it simple. This is like teaching. Everybody has a question in a class, and nobody wants to ask the first question.
Right.
And the screen is so there are enough people on that I don't have a really big screen, so I'm kind of going back and forth.
Yeah, I can't see the second screen. Yeah.
And everybody's hiding. Nobody's on cam.
You guys are all.
Hi, Olivia. All right.
Oh, former student Olivia. Yeah.
Unmute yourself.
Hi, guys. Thanks so much for hosting this event. It's wonderful to see and hear you both. To those who don't know, I'm an alum of the J School, I've returned as a fellow, but I did my reporting RW1 class with Jess and Dale, and feel very excited for all the success that Nomadland has had. I wanted to ask, with the sort of picking up from Dale's last part of the Q&A about the process of getting the film optioned and then obviously sold, if you go through that process again, like what were some of the things that you learned that maybe you do differently? I mean, it sounds like you've had largely a really positive experience. I know a lot of first-time authors don't necessarily have that when their books are sold. So I'd love to kind of get a sense of things that you learned in that process.
Well, it's funny. I think we did a pretty good job. I think we would have done a few things differently if we'd known that something called COVID was going to devastate the world, and everything would be streaming, because streaming wasn't the same thing it was when we did my contract, for example. And I think if I were to do it again, I would do it differently, but I would do it differently because I'd done Nomadland. And when you do this in the beginning, if you're kind of wandering naked in Hollywood, you don't have any power. Do you know what I mean? It is a power town in a very different way from New York. I still refer to people as Holly weirdos. It's not mean. It's just me kind of feeling like I'm from space, and maybe they are too. But what I've been told is, because of Nomadland doing as well as it did, that if I got approached again for something, I might have a little bit more of that power, because I would love to be involved with screenwriting. I'd love to be, I was a consulting producer, so I contributed a lot of stuff, but I'd love to have a seat that I could actually pull up to the table instead of a seat that was in a slightly different room. And I think I could probably broker that now, which is kind of exciting.
Right, somebody else had their hand up. Oh yeah, Adam.
Were you on set since it wasn't a real set, but were you there during all or parts of the filming? And you mentioned that your input was welcomed. Can you talk a little bit more about how you contributed to the movie as it was filming?
Sure. I was a consulting producer, and from the beginning, I was giving the director notes on everything from the Rubber Tramp Rendezvous to different people who might be available, both in speaking roles and as extras. I was giving her chunks of interview tape when she wanted to hear what people sounded like. I gave her a bunch of research, primary source material that didn't make it into the book. A lot of it informed their Empire stuff. That's a long story for another time. But yeah, so I was kind of a fixer and a shoveler of research. When I first met Chloe, I said, look, I feel like I'm some crazy grocery hoarder, and I have all these ingredients in my pantry that I've been keeping for years. And my job now is to put them on the table. And I think you're going to cook an amazing meal. I've seen you do it before. And, you'll take whatever you want and you'll cook it. And that's what I did. And she cooked it. On set, I was on set for about a week in Arizona. They recreated that event, the Rubber Tramp Rendezvous. And I was out there inhaling my van. And a lot of people I knew were there. I'd helped recruit extras. And after the event ended, which was bizarre because the event maybe only had 50 people. It was supposed to be an early Rubber Tramp Rendezvous. We went to the current one, which had more than 8,000 people. So it was kind of like doing a really speedy bit of time travel, just going from the set to reality. And my brain kind of exploded a little bit, but it was interesting.
I guess you may want to tell one fun fact. The Fern's van in the movie, what's the number on the back door?
I don't have it memorized. It's the ISBN number of the book. And I haven't seen the film on like a really good screen yet. I saw it at a drive-in and the light was funky. So it's possible you can see it. I didn't. But in good light pictures of the van, you can see in ghost paint, there's a logo for the United States Gypsum Factory on one side, or corporation. And on the back is a number that looks like it must be a license or something. And it's actually, again, the ISBN number from the book, which I thought was kind of cool. That's a book nerd Easter egg.
Where's Waldo?
I don't know. Oh, that wasn't a question. Sorry.
No. Other questions?
Cricket.
Whitney has a question. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I'll ask the question. I'm curious to know, you talked about not having a video camera with you. Sorry, I don't have my photo on here. But would you do that again? If you were to go out and report a big piece like this again, would you try to do video this time?
I might, but I feel, something funny. After the Harper story came out, I got approached by, oh gosh, Dale, what's his name? The guy who did Super Size Me?
Oh, yeah, that senior moment. I don't remember.
Yeah, I'm glad I didn't hang with him because he got me too'd, but that's another story.
Morgan Spurlock.
Thank you, Adam.
That's it.
Well interjected, sir. And he proposed doing a long documentary. I could have been an executive producer on it. But what freaked me out was the idea of having a bunch of people with a camera. And beyond that, just not feeling like I had a sense of how to create that kind of intimacy with a camera. Now, that was a few years ago. And I feel like the world has already changed in that regard a bit, in terms of people are just so accustomed to being on video in a way that maybe they weren't in 2014 when the Harper story came out. So I would try to have some sort of capacity for video. I have a little, one of those little Fuji, I think it's an X-T3, and it shoots pretty great video. So I think what I would do is bug one of my students to tell me, or maybe go bug Do or something, I'll bet he'd know, about what would be intelligent to attach to that thing to do good audio as well, because I've got a great recorder, but I need some of the bridge part. So I think I would definitely try to integrate it. The only video I got was when I was undercover at Amazon. I had a tiny little key fob with a camera in it that I used to take visual notes. And Laura Poitras, who did Citizen4, the Snowden film, reached out to me and said, do you have any footage? And I said, well, I only have this not so Steadicam, awful wiped out stuff from inside the warehouse. And she said, show it to me. And that ended up being the basis of a short film called Camper Force. So that was, clearly I wish I had more video. All I had is this kind of impressionistic, bizarre warehouse footage. So that was a long answer.
No, that was great. I'll ask you one more just because I'm curious. Now, a lot of magazine writers find that they can option their pieces without ever doing the book. And it can make a difference. And you can option a few pieces and decide which one has legs. Do you think that's like sort of the next wave for you?
Interesting. No, actually, not to be contrarian, but because in my mind, once it gets optioned and goes into movie land, it's so in the zeitgeist already that going back and reporting it wouldn't feel fresh to me. It would feel almost like collecting my own regurgitated leftovers or something. Like, I don't think I'd want to do that. I do love the idea of kind of piloting a book as a movie story. And that's happened for the past 2 books I've done, both Nomadland and a short book I did with Dale that was based on a Harper's cover we did together about a Snowden situation. So in my mind, I love working on something that's long form to see if I can do it at even greater length.
Thank you.
Of course.
Yeah. Hello, Jessica.
Hi, Maria.
Yeah. I wanted to know a little bit more about the relationship that you cultivate with your sources, because I guess that it's required a lot of like intimacy, and also if you were, for example, remembering them that you were a journalist, because I can imagine that sometimes the margins become a little bit difficult to establish when you are gaining such an important trust from your source.
Yeah, I mean, I tended to remind people I was a journalist, and I also went home, and that turned out to be really important. I was on the road a lot. The first time I was out, it was for 2 months in a row. But after that, I came back to Brooklyn and did my writing and my work. And I feel like that helped me keep some perspective and helped remind me what I was doing, and that my allegiances were a little more complicated than they would be if I was just out there doing it, right? So I tried to stay square with them. I tried to stay square with myself. And when things got weird, I tried to, like your 4th grade math teacher might have told you, to show your work. I tried to talk about it, to kind of bring it on the table. Those just bizarre experiences that happen, because I know when I read books, I'm always interested in that part. There's she used to write for GQ, Jean Marie Laskus, did a great story. I think it was about people in the Arctic drilling oil. And she'll come out and say in the middle, I really thought these people were here for reason X, and they're contradicting me and saying it's for reason Y. So she'll show how her own initial impressions and prejudices might have been upended. And I try to do stuff like that too, to kind of bring the reader along. And then hopefully you're kind of a proxy for the reader. Anybody else?
Jess, it's Melanie.
Hi.
Hi. So I wanted to ask about how the real people who, were subjects of the book and then involved in the film, like, how do they feel about it? How has it impacted their lives? Where are they now? Kind of stuff.
All right, well, I can tell you about the big 3. The big 3 would be Linda May, the main person in the book, Swanky, who has become eponymous, for the record. She used to be Charlene Swanky, but now she's like Madonna. I don't know.
Swanky.
Yeah, just Swanky, or Swanky Wheels before. Now it's just Swanky, which we tease her about a lot. She's like Cher, right? And Bob Wells. And all 3 of them were people I spent a lot of time with. And they all decided to get involved with the movie. And frankly, all of them were really happy about it. I felt really lucky that all of them were happy with the book. I mean, that felt like enough of a gift, because I'm not their PR agent. And sometimes my perspective on the world diverges from theirs. And sometimes the way I see their situations is not the way they would describe them. But they got it. And when they signed on for the movie, they were excited. And I think, from what I can tell, they feel really good about it. We were all at the premiere. There was a screening in September in LA at a drive-in, and they were up there on stage with Frances and Chloe talking about feeling validated in getting to tell their stories. And that really choked me up. For me, that was more exciting than seeing, a celebrity talk on the mic. We're seeing these people I'd known so well, and this chance they took and this place they ended up that they didn't expect. Bob is still on the road. Swanky is still on the road. Linda just bought a house. that is kind of a fixer-upper, but pretty awesome. Dale, I haven't showed you pictures yet, but I'm hoping to go visit her.
Nice.
So maybe that's it.
I think so. Well,
I'll ask a question. Sorry, I'm just gonna.
Amy's asking a question.
I don't know if there's protocol. Yeah, could you talk a bit about the structure of the book and how you expanded it from the magazine article? I am finishing a proposal that my agent and I are going to send out, and she keeps asking me like, well, what's the moral of the story? And I'm like, there isn't really a moral of the story. It's a narrative nonfiction book, and it's similar where there's immersion in a community. And I know I did the chapter outlines and everything, and I know what's going to happen, but I don't have like a one final, here's the message of this whole book.
you don't want one.
Right. I mean, it's an organic book, and I'm telling you know how it is. So I wonder what your experience was like when you were putting the proposal together. I mean, they had the magazine article, so that helps a lot, I imagine. But can you talk about the structure of first the proposal and then the book, because that can be quite different than the proposal?
Yeah, the magazine article really helped a lot because my Harper's editor was actually just chatting with a Norton editor at lunch and offered to show it to her, and she fell in love with it. And then I had to go back and get a new agent and write a proposal, so it wasn't a shotgun wedding. But the fact that I'd done the magazine story really helped prime things. The magazine story is very linear. It starts at what's probably Linda's lowest moment, and then moves through my reporting with her, and kind of intersperses it with things including the history of retirement, stuff like that. These other little capsule histories that give context to her story and give it a bigger meaning than one person's experience. So that was linear. I mean, it was really a classic 3-act structure where the first act sets out that question or challenge. The second act is what I call struggle, and I call the third untidy resolution. And I call it untidy for precisely the reason you suggest, which is that there are no neat endings. I think the only real ending is kind of a Great Gatsby ending, which is kind of boats beating on against the current, right? The continuation of struggle. Things don't wrap up. When I did the book, I wanted to start it in a different place. And I started with Linda driving uphill to this job, because it was kind of this crazy action scene. It set her up in a different place that I thought would kind of have a longer trajectory for the book. And I also just thought it would kind of have a bit of a WTF moment for readers that would make them want to know more. But basically that was kind of this in medias res sort of beginning, where it's like we go here and then we flash back, we figure out how we got here, we go through here, which is the hardest part, because how do you do that without duplicating where you've been? You can do it. I read other people doing it to figure out how to do it. And then coming through to the ending, talking about where I thought it was going to end and where it actually ended, if that makes sense. And having, again, sub-chapters that dealt with themes that were relevant and kind of basically using them almost like spokes off of the hub on a bicycle wheel. Did I get all of it? The proposal,
Yeah,
it was basically the magazine article, sample chapter outline, maybe a chapter, and I totally changed it later, and it was fine.
Yeah, that definitely happens. And then just a really quick follow-up is that this is not a craft question, but like a, the 360 view question and policy, from a policy perspective, when you're asked, like, what are the takeaways that you learned that could help people, in terms of like a policy perspective, what are your takeaways?
In terms of what could help people in the situation, like,
yeah,
okay,
yeah, people are looking at the book as like a commentary on people who don't have social safety nets, people who lost their jobs and so on. So it's a commentary about these broader issues happening in society.
Yeah, and I mostly saved it for the end, because I didn't want the narrative to feel like a polemic. It was really important to me to feel that I was showing rather than telling, and bringing readers on an immersive experience rather than kind of campaigning. I didn't want them to feel like I was trying to sell them something. But when I got to the end, I felt like if I was ever going to have their trust and their confidence, and basically the authority to say some takeaways and to share them, it was there. And it was in a coda to the book where I talked about widening income inequality, the failure of retirement finance, minimum wage, a lot of these things that are really abstract. And if you want to get into them, it kind of feels like more like the bullet points we've already heard. So I kind of, Dale, how did I do it? We talked about it a lot. It's just a lot of like, this is what's going on. We need to pay attention to it. These are some of the obvious things.
You can't be prescriptive. I mean, some of the criticisms of the film are that it's just presenting the people in their situations. It goes back to, we're journalists and writers. We're not activists, even though I do have strong opinions about what should be done. You can't be strident in the work. You point out how people are living, and then it goes from there.
And you can also use it as a springboard for other stuff. I'm working on an op-ed right now that I'm trying to do. I went and talked to senators at one point. People will kind of call on you and ask you about it. But the other thing is, it does get weird. I remember when Bernie Sanders, there was a moment where whenever anybody wanted to hit Amazon with a large mallet, I would get a phone call. And it was just like, kind of press the Jack in the Box button, and because we'll bet she'll jump out. And that wasn't where I wanted to be. I wanted to be telling stories. I wanted to be able to keep writing about the topics that interested me without people thinking I had an agenda. I remember when the Bernie Sanders campaign contacted me to do something about Amazon, and it would have been all kind of op-ed, and I wouldn't have had control over how it was edited, and it would have been for a politician. Now, I'm simpatico with some of the stuff Bernie says, so this wasn't a, go away Bernie Sanders, but I just thought, for me and my work in the world, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it and continue to have the kind of access to the kind of stories that I want to tell. All right, I'm looking back and forth, looking up and down. I think everybody wants dinner. Am I right? Put your hand up if you want dinner. Come on, fake hands. Okay, nobody wants dinner either. All right, thank you, Olivia. I was hoping to see the little yellow. All right, thanks, Adam. All right. Oh, Shane put his hand in the air.
All right, well, thanks everybody for coming.
Yeah, thanks for hanging out with us. And we're both around the J School, so.
Yeah, thank the J School, you guys, for hosting. Really appreciate it. Julie and everybody else, that was great.
Thank you, Julie and Winnie.
Enjoyed seeing the posters in the elevator today.
It's so great to see you guys. We'll be thinking about you as Oscar night comes along.
Oh, thank you. Yeah,
Good
seeing
luck.
the flyers was cool. It's like in the pandemic era, it does feel like seeing the first leaves of spring. It's like the flyers have returned. They've migrated back.
Absolutely. Thank you so very, very much. This has been terrific.
Thank you so much.
Right. Thanks,
Hey, guys.
everybody.
So great.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a good
Have
night,
a good
everyone.
dinner.
Thank you.